somebody who is steeped, I have to say, in understanding the American mentality. And I'm very pleased to have him on the show, is adjunct professor and political scientist from the University of Pittsburgh, specialising, ironically, in presidential rhetoric. Joining us now from Pittsburgh is adjunct Professor Jerry Shuster. Jerry, lovely to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you today. Thanks for asking.
You would have heard my introduction on this particular mark today. We've always suggested that the extremists amongst us come from peoples who are not like us, following religions that are not ours. But you'd have to say that the rhetoric on the American election circuit over this last year, Jerry, has been pretty extreme on both sides.
Oh, it has indeed. That's been one of our peculiar, but unfortunately dangerous issues that we as citizens have to face.
So really, in some ways, this assassination attempt of Donald Trump didn't come out of a clear blue sky. That said, I've read in the last 24 hours, Jerry, and I'd be interested in your impression, that this, in actual fact, will work rather well politically for Donald Trump. What's your view?
Well, that remains to be seen. It may, if his staffers and he himself can get past the ego and be able to use this strategically to his advantage. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think after a limited period of time, whatever that is, maybe a week, 2 weeks, I think it's going to go right back to the point where he's going to characterize himself as a kind of a martyr. Frankly, I just think God was watching him, and he was able. He's a very, very fortunate man. But in any regard, he can't. His rhetoric this morning, with all of the principles, has been very smooth and very, I would say, very acceptable. But it's not going to take very long for him to go back into his own personality. Remember, this was the man who on March 28th of this year, I don't recall the exact quote, but pretty much on target said, if I'm not elected, it'll be a bloodbath. You know, and that's the kind of rhetoric that has permeated his campaign, actually a little bit more than the Democrats. But that's not to say the Democrats are innocent. They are by no means. But nonetheless, those kinds of things just reinforce what some of the followers say. Oh, yes, this is exactly what we need to do. Follow this man's direction. And, you get in 90-degree heat, and you get 9,000 to 12,000 people standing in an open field, and having been there for, as many as 8 to 10 hours, something tragic was bound to happen, not necessarily something this tragic, because I don't think anybody anticipated that. But in any event, it's what has symbolized our politics of late, unfortunately.
Yeah, but listen, I'm going to be very honest with you, Jerry. I toured the United States as a guest of your government way back in the early 1990s. And I was allowed to spend a month in your country, touring a variety of states and talking to a number of political personalities on both sides of the divide, including having a visit to the White House, the Pentagon, the State Department, and discussions with officials there. The thing that struck me, even in the early 1990s, was this hatred that was evolving, not between black and white, but between Democrat and Republican. And ever since I've been back to the United States, I've only seen that amplify over the last 30, 40 years, or last 20 years in particular.
I wouldn't disagree with you there, Michael. Believe me, by a long shot.
I don't get the tribalization of American politics. Can you please describe it to us in New Zealand? Because although we have lots of friends and family who might vote Labour, Greens or whatever in this country, or ACT or Labour, which are National Party, which are our major parties here, you wouldn't refuse to sit at their table. You wouldn't refuse to allow their daughter who might have voted the other way to not come to your party. You wouldn't get rid of people as social acquaintances just because they had a different politics than you. Why is that the case in the United States?
That has been more recent. Typically, the Republicans used to be characterized as primarily corporate, wealthy individuals. And I'm giving you a sweeping generalization now. This is not to characterize every single registered Republican, but they were the ones who dominate the party structure, the philosophy, and the way the party would focus. And then the Democrats would be more the general working person, the middle class, and so on, and those who had to work hard to get an education, that kind of thing. Suddenly it started to change whenever certain factions got involved within the parties themselves and started to change the philosophy to the point where you have persons today who speak for the party and generate the kind of, I'm going to characterize it as the way they are attracted to people, the kind of like John Kennedy did, only in another fashion, to bring people to the forefront to think like he does. And then these politicians are coming to the fore, like, and I guess it permeates now in the face of a person like Donald Trump, where they have, make America great again. They've confused those issues with what America is really all about. And if
what
you
are
look
you
at the
about?
people,
No, Jerry, I think you're talking crap. And I'll tell you why. The fact is that you are identifying only the Republicans and particularly Donald Trump as the villain here.
No, I was going to go to the Democrats too.
Yeah, well, it's just that it seems to me that his whole shtick was anti-Washington to start with, right? I mean, that was his whole basis. I'm going there to clean the swamp because the Washington, D.C. and its political apparatus had become so disassociated from the ordinary lives of ordinary Americans who frankly were just over it and saw Trump as sort of a retributive tool, if you like, against that kind of, I guess, the political managerial class.
Well, I'm not going to argue with your conclusion there.
Okay, so given that was the case, I see just Trump as a manifestation of that anti-Washington feeling. But I'm also looking at Democrats, for example, at the moment, and the extreme rhetoric that they've been used. I've noticed in the last 24 hours, the Democrats, for example, Jerry, have pulled all their advertising suggesting that Trump is a threat to democracy because I guess they realise in the wake of what they've said they could be responsible for that young man sitting on that roof taking pot shots at Trump and the Republican crowd 150 metres away. Isn't it time that all of the United States started to realise that all of their rhetoric is dangerous?
Yes. Yeah, all of that kind of rhetoric is on both sides. But
yes.
In particular, the Republicans have seemed to dominate the kind of rhetoric that seems to attract a particular kind of individual that is a lot more has a lot more potential to do some damage, both politically and to physical.
I didn't see a Democrat. It wasn't a Republican sitting there trying to assassinate a presidential campaign. I mean, aren't you slightly misdirected, Jerry? It wasn't the guy who was trying to kill Trump was presumably opposed to his political agenda. Yes.
Yeah, parts of his agenda, yes, but he's a registered Republican nonetheless. So it's hard to. They're not really sure yet where he was coming from.